Hello, this is Claudia, and this is my presentation on my archival internship at the Hegewisch branch of the Chicago Public Library. My internship site is actually my work site as well. It's located at 3048 East 130th Street. It is one of 81 neighborhood branches of the Chicago Public Library. If you note in the highlighted red on the neighborhood map, it is the farthest neighborhood southeast within the city limits of Chicago. Also, the branch is one of 3 public libraries in the 10th Ward. If I'm not mistaken, it's one of the, if not the only wards with this many branches. The locals pronounce it Hegewisch. We can identify non-locals when they pronounce it anything but that, and especially if they say Hegewisch. The branch is in a neighborhood surrounded by marshlands. There's factories such as like the Ford Motor Company and other industrial factories. We service a population just over 9,000. In the past, it was predominantly a Polish neighborhood, and now the Latinx community is on the rise. Here is a picture of the different types of materials that we house. We are a repository for waste management, so we get reports that are brought in and filed in chronological order in the binders, and some of the older files are in that pile that you see on the far right there. In the middle is more of the environmental subjects and collections, binders, bound books, spiral books, reports, but also 2 archival boxes that are mainly part of the Hegewisch history and library history. On the far left is a note that's taped onto one of the archival boxes, and it gives you an idea of where this collection and the access to it was at the time. We believe it was up until the early 2000s, mainly collected by a former branch manager and the reference librarians. It reads, "Must be signed out," and "always," which is underlined, under lock and key. To give you a little backstory on the description of the collection, this neighborhood is considered a hidden gem of the city. It's part of the city, but far enough where it feels like a little mini suburb. Yet this area has a long history of being a dumping ground for the steel industry. There's been lots of potential projects, yet many unmet promises of investments and development. Earlier this year, in January, it was announced by the alderman that the ward had received a $900,000 grant to further develop the Big Marsh Park into an urban recreational park. And so that, of course, with everything going on, is on hold, and we'll see what the future holds for that. And on the far right, these 2 articles are most recent of events in this past summer where the Little Leagues underwent a cleanup and digging for testing because of high levels of lead and arsenic. Later, the EPA, as a result, found more than approved levels of manganese, which is due to the steel industry dumping in the area, and literally these parks are across the street from these grounds, and they're also 3 blocks down from the library. So getting to work involved identifying the different types of materials and surveying and creating a mini inventory, assessing the conditions of the unprocessed materials. These materials have not been touched in years, and much less been processed. And so a preliminary processing plan is what took major part of my work. Taking a look at the condition, first and foremost, we do have a steel roof, and so over the years in this particular room and throughout the library there's been leaks and of course damage to material. At one point I remember our library blueprints were damaged because water came down a wall and down into the bookcases in this computer room where the maps were just stored. On the far left you see an example. This is a book, a reference book that's encased in this box with signs of water damage. We have oversized posters, such as this middle picture of the Lake Calumet Airport, which was at once a proposed project for the area that fell through and was fought against. And the two archival boxes that I focused on, because this really was a collection that was just accumulated over the years and has not ever been processed. This is one of the two, and it's the worst of the two in, as far as condition, barely holding on with tape. That article that I mentioned before is taped onto the inside of this box, and so it hints to what the collection is about. Like I said, the major part of my work was processing and coming up with a preliminary plan to arrange this material, but also in doing the inventory, I did what we did in other exercises, where numbering the boxes for the purposes of the data, as well as the folders and titles as best as I can. And the most interesting part was trying to find the date ranges on the material. And then I also had a column for notes where I noted the condition, any evidence of ownership. For example, the magazines had address labels of someone, and it turns out to be from the local Chamber of Commerce. And so noting specific information like that in this area. It turned out to be just over 6 pages because much of the material was not in folders. It was just kind of layered in this box. And so going through one by one, trying to identify whether it was a clipping, a photocopy, and going one by one and listing each in this inventory. Some of the most interesting aspects of this work were, of course, finding unique material. My favorite was this black and yellow oversized poster. It was a campaign from the mayor in 1949 promoting sanitary galvanized steel garbage cans for a cleaner Chicago. It was very interesting. It came along with a letter and report, and also the next was finding myself trying to verify this information that we were finding. The first picture is an invitation to the groundbreaking ceremony of the branch, and it has the address as 3054, and our current address is 3048. To this day, Uber drivers, Pace drivers still end up down the street or across the street because somehow this address still keeps popping up. And the next, I found myself a lot having to hold back from disrupting the order. In my mind, I was trying to think ahead and how this material could be arranged, but I had to hold back and get through the inventory that way. And from the beginning, I had this assumption that there was no rhyme or reason to how this material was collected or the order. I had no idea what was in here. But really, the collection tells a story of not just the content itself, because there was a lot of interesting articles that were collected, but also the intention of the collector. It was very evident that the collector was trying to collect things on the history of the neighborhood and also the history of the branch and its origins. The insight I gained on the profession was primarily how much details matter, even in just the beginning stages, the basic process of inventory. And here I have a picture of the gloves, quite dirty. And I made the mistake the first time I opened the glass case to flip through material without gloves, and you couldn't get through one item without feeling the dust. And so, again, going through the material, perspective on future programs. There's so much of the oversized material that would be great visuals, and we also came across material that we thought, we'd have programs before that we could have used and presented the material. Definitely gained knowledge on the branch and the neighborhood, more than what I ever thought I knew. And also, during November, we had a COVID case, and so we had to close for 2 weeks. So what then? What do we do when we don't have access to the physical collection? And so it really forced me to think how else I can gather information and knowledge on the neighborhood and the library. We know our patrons on a name basis, co-workers who have worked and lived in the area for over 15 years, businesses, schools. We have all these contact information that are of great value to add to the knowledge that we have. As for future plans, of course, we need to look into replacing the archival boxes, and there are two possible routes, and one is to see what our Central Archives Department has to offer. Right now, these closed departments are in part working from home, and so they're very limited as to what we can do right now. The second is, normally we collect fines. Right now, because of the pandemic, we're not. And from there, we can allocate funds for purchasing supplies that we can't get through centrally through our library system. So that's another option. As far as selection and storage, we have subscription to databases for newspapers, and so we need to go back and review if some of these newspapers, do we even need to keep some of these because we have access to them through the subscriptions. And new material, you see here a picture of me with these plants. Most recently, I would say just about a month ago, a patron asked if they could donate a plant, and my boss said yes. And so we acquired this new plant. They are actually parents of a librarian for the library, who actually lives in the neighborhood and worked at the library at some point. And so there they were. They lived down the street, and they rolled it in on a dolly and placed it. They thought of the library because of the lighting, and we have this almost floor-to-ceiling window that they thought it would be perfect, and it's doing fine. So who knows, I might have a plant collection that I may need to process. As I mentioned throughout my presentation, the pandemic has presented limitations. It gets me to think about also the opportunities for the archives profession right now. Many institutions may be closed to the public. In our case, sections of our libraries are closed to the public, and it's an opportunity to take on projects like this, where otherwise we would never have nearly enough time nor the space to process materials or even consider taking on projects like processing a collection. Thank you for your time.